What if an ordinary moment, a waitress wiping down a table, was the only thing that could bring a multi-millionairess to her knees? For 25 agonizing years, Eleanor Hayes Worthington mourned the daughter who vanished without a trace. Her son, a titan of industry, built an empire on a foundation of cold, hard control to bury the pain. But one Tuesday afternoon, in a restaurant buzzing with casual conversation, time stood still. An elderly woman's hand, trembling but strong, reached out and gripped a young waitress. A whisper cut through the noise. "You have my daughter's eyes." And in that instant, the billionaire son collapsed, and a secret buried for a quarter century began to claw its way toward the light. What city are you watching this video from, and what time is it? By the way, if you're enjoying my videos, I'd be so happy if you could subscribe to my channel and like this video. Chloe believed in the rhythm of small things. The clink of clean silverware, the satisfying weight of a full water pitcher, the subtle nod from a regular customer. These were the metronomes of her life, a steady beat that kept the anxieties of rent payments and an uncertain future at bay. At 26, she was a professional waitress at the Sterling Grill, a restaurant in downtown Boston that served the city's elite, people whose appetizers cost more than her weekly groceries. She was good at her job, efficient, observant, and most importantly, invisible. In her world, invisibility was a shield. That Tuesday afternoon, the lunch rush was a controlled storm. Chloe moved through it like a dancer, her tray a constant partner. She refilled water glasses at table 7, took a dessert order from table 11, and headed toward table 9, a quiet booth in the corner occupied by an elderly woman of severe elegance and a man in a suit so sharp it could cut glass. They were the Worthingtons. Even a waitress knew that name. Max Worthington was a legend in the financial world, a man who didn't just acquire companies, he consumed them. His face, etched with a permanent scowl, was a familiar sight on the financial news. His mother, Eleanor, was the family matriarch, a figure of old-world grace and rumored tragedy. Chloe approached with a gentle, practiced smile. "May I offer you anything else, sir, ma'am? More coffee?" Max didn't even look up from his phone, his thumb swiping with dismissive speed. He just grunted a negative. It was Eleanor who looked up. Her gaze was distant, clouded with a melancholy that seemed as much a part of her as the string of pearls at her throat. Her eyes, a pale, watery blue, flickered over Chloe's face and then stopped. It was a strange moment. The bustling noise of the restaurant seemed to fade to a low hum. The eyes of Eleanor Hayes Worthington, no longer distant, sharpened with an intensity that made Chloe hold her breath. The old woman leaned forward slightly, her perfectly manicured hands gripping the edge of the mahogany table. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. "Ma'am?" Chloe asked, a chill of unease prickling her skin. She was used to being ignored, not examined like a museum artifact. Max finally looked up, annoyed by the interruption. "Mother, what is it? We need to get to the board meeting." But Eleanor didn't hear him. Her focus was entirely on Chloe. She saw the dark brown hair that fell across her forehead, the curve of her jaw, the tiny, almost imperceptible mole just beneath her left ear. But it was the eyes that held her captive. They were a deep, vibrant hazel, flecked with gold and green. The kind of eyes that seemed to hold entire forests within them. They were her daughter's eyes. Sophie's. The name was a ghost on Eleanor's lips, a sound so faint Chloe almost didn't hear it. Before Chloe could react, Eleanor's hand shot out across the table with surprising speed. Her fingers, cold and shockingly strong, closed around Chloe's wrist. The touch was like an electric shock. "You," Eleanor whispered, her voice trembling with a mixture of disbelief and fierce hope. "You have my daughter's eyes." The statement hung in the air, a bizarre, impossible claim. Patrons at nearby tables turned to look. Chloe stood frozen, the water pitcher in her other hand suddenly feeling impossibly heavy. She tried to pull her arm back, but the old woman's grip was like iron. "Mother, what are you doing?" Max's voice was sharp. "Let go of the girl. You're making a scene." He rose from his seat, his imposing presence casting a shadow over the table. But as he looked from his mother's frantic face to the shocked waitresses, something in him shifted. For the first time, he truly looked at the girl. He saw the eyes his mother spoke of. He saw the familiar shape of the face. and a memory locked away for 25 years broke free. A memory of his sister, Sophie, laughing in the garden, her hazel eyes bright with a rebelliousness he could never understand. The blood drained from his face. The carefully constructed walls he had built around his heart for a quarter of a century began to crumble. The past wasn't dead. It was standing right in front of him, wearing a waitress uniform. Sophie, he echoed his mother's whisper, but his was filled with a different emotion. Not hope, but a deep, cavernous guilt. His breath hitched. His hand went to his chest, clutching the expensive fabric of his suit. The room began to spin, the edges of his vision distorted into a meaningless blur. The last thing he saw was Chloe's face, a mirror of his lost sister, her eyes wide with fear and confusion. Then, with a choked gasp, Max Worthington, the unshakable titan of finance, collapsed. He crumpled to the floor like a puppet with its strings cut, sending fine china and crystal scattering across the polished wood. The restaurant erupted into chaos. Eleanor screamed, and Chloe Mendoza stood motionless, her wrist still in the old woman's grip. Her simple, rhythmic life shattered into a million unrecognizable pieces. Eleanor Hayes Worthington's scream pierced the cacophony of gasps and scraping chairs. Paramedics, summoned by the quick-thinking restaurant manager, flooded the scene, their movements urgent and professional. They worked on Max, shouting medical jargon that was as foreign to Chloe as the idea that her eyes could fell a billionaire. She was finally released from Eleanor's grip, stumbling back against an adjacent table, her mind a whirlwind of confusion. Someone, a man in a dark suit who seemed to appear from nowhere, guided Eleanor away. He spoke in low, calming tones, but the old woman's gaze remained fixed on Chloe, a burning, desperate look that followed her even as she was escorted outside. Chloe was left standing amid the wreckage, feeling the weight of 100 pairs of eyes on her. She was no longer invisible. She was the epicenter of a disaster she couldn't comprehend. The police arrived, then a man who introduced himself as Arthur Harrison, chief counsel for Worthington Industries. He was the same man who had led Eleanor away. He had calm gray eyes that seemed to see everything, and a mouth that looked like it had never learned to smile. He asked her questions in a clipped, professional tone. Name, age, how long had she worked here? Did she know the Worthingtons? No, sir, she murmured, her voice barely audible. I just served them coffee. He took her information, handed her a crisp business card, and told her not to speak to the press. We will be in touch, he said. It wasn't a request. It was a statement of fact. Chloe was sent home. The walk to her small apartment, usually a time for decompression, was a blur. She shared the cramped 2-bedroom space with her best friend Rosie, a vibrant art student who paid her share of the rent by painting portraits. Rosie found her sitting on their lumpy couch, staring blankly at the wall. Chloe, what happened? The manager called. He said there was an incident, and you had the rest of the day off. You look like you've seen a ghost. Chloe relayed the story, her words tumbling out in a disjointed rush. The elegant old woman, the cold billionaire, the grip on her wrist, the impossible words, the collapse. Rosie listened, her usual boisterous energy subdued by concern. Wow, you have my daughter's eyes. That's straight out of a movie. Are you okay? It must have been terrifying. It was surreal, Chloe said, rubbing her wrist. The way she looked at me, Rosie, it wasn't just a compliment. It was like she was looking through me, at someone else. And the sun, he looked at me, and he just broke. The next 24 hours were a tense limbo. Chloe's phone buzzed with calls from her manager, who was being harassed by reporters. The story, though suppressed by the Worthington PR machine, was leaking out in whispers. Max Worthington suffers massive coronary event at the Sterling Grill. Mystery waitress involved. The call from Arthur Harrison came the following afternoon. He requested a meeting, not at his office, but in a discreet suite at the Lenox Hotel. The implication was clear. This was not a matter for the public record. Against Rosie's better judgment. It feels like you're walking into a spider's web. Chloe went. She wore her nicest blouse and tried to project a confidence she didn't feel. The suite was breathtaking, with sweeping views of the city she could normally only see from below. Eleanor Hayes Worthington was seated on a plush velvet sofa, looking smaller and more fragile than she had in the restaurant. Her grief was a palpable presence in the room. Arthur Harrison stood by the window, a sentinel in a gray suit. "Miss Mendoza," Eleanor began, her voice hoarse but firm. "Thank you for coming." "Please sit." Chloe sat stiffly on the edge of an armchair. "I'm so sorry about what happened to your son. But I don't understand." 25 years ago, Eleanor said, her voice dropping to nearly a whisper. "I lost my daughter, Sophie. She was 22, headstrong, beautiful, full of life. She had a fight with the family, with her father and Max, about a man she was seeing, about her future. She walked out of our home one night, and we never saw her again." The pain in her voice was so raw, so ancient, that Chloe felt an involuntary pang of sympathy. "We hired investigators. We spent millions. There were leads that went nowhere. Cruel hoaxes. After years, the police declared her legally dead. But I never believed it. A mother knows. I never felt in my soul that she was gone from this earth." She leaned forward, her intensity returning. "When I saw you yesterday, I saw her. It wasn't just your eyes. It was everything. The way you stand, the shape of your face. You are the living image of my Sophie." Chloe felt her head spin. "Mrs. Worthington, this is a mistake. I was born in Springfield. I was raised in the Massachusetts foster care system. My parents, I never knew them. They died in a car crash when I was a baby. That's all I know, really." Arthur Harrison's voice cut in, smooth and sharp. He stepped forward, holding a thin file. "We took the liberty of doing a preliminary investigation, Miss Mendoza. Your record is sparse. You entered the Massachusetts foster care system at 18 months old. The official report states you were found abandoned. The story about your parents dying in a car crash was something your first foster mother told you. There are no death certificates, no accident report, no record of a Mendoza couple perishing in that time frame and leaving behind a child." Chloe's heart hammered against her ribs. What are you saying?" "We are saying," Eleanor said, her voice trembling with the weight of her next words, "that we believe you are Sophie's daughter. We believe our daughter was pregnant when she disappeared." The air in the room thickened, heavy with the enormity of the suggestion. Chloe felt like she was drowning. This was insane. It was a fantasy cooked up by a grieving mother. That's impossible," she stammered. "Is it?" Harrison countered. "Or is it an answer to a question you've had your entire life?" He had her there. The faceless ghosts of her parents, the gnawing emptiness of not knowing where she came from. It was the central void of her existence. Eleanor stood and walked to Chloe, her movements slow and deliberate. She didn't touch her, but stood so close Chloe could smell her faint, lilac-scented perfume. "We want to know the truth," Eleanor pleaded, her composure finally cracking. Tears welled in her eyes. "I have to know. I am an old woman, Miss Mendoza. I have lived for a quarter century in a gray, sunless world. You are the first ray of light I have seen. Please." The raw desperation in her voice was devastating. Chloe looked from Eleanor's tear-streaked face to Arthur Harrison's impassive one. She knew what was coming next. "We are prepared to make you an offer," Harrison said, his tone all business again. "Agree to a medically certified DNA test. While we await the results, which will be handled with the utmost discretion, we will deposit $100,000 into an account of your choosing. It is yours to keep, regardless of the outcome, to compensate you for this intrusion." Chloe stared at him, speechless. $100,000 was a sum so vast, it was abstract. It would solve every problem she had and a dozen she hadn't even thought of yet. It was a golden key to a different life. And if... Chloe's voice was a dry rasp. "If it matches?" Eleanor answered, her voice soft but laden with promise. "If you are my granddaughter, you will never have to worry about anything. Ever again. You will be a Worthington." It wasn't just an offer. It was a temptation. An escape from the daily grind and a possible answer to the question that haunted her. But it was also terrifying. To be a Worthington. To be part of this family of tragedy and immense, suffocating wealth. It was a gilded cage and the door was swinging open. I need to think," she said, finally finding her voice. "Of course," Harrison said smoothly. "Take 24 hours. He slid a paper across the table. It was a non-disclosure agreement and the terms of their offer, all laid out in neat legal type. My number is at the bottom. I will await your call." Chloe walked out of the hotel and back into the sunlight of her own world, feeling as if she had just visited another planet. In her pocket was a piece of paper that could either change her life or condemn it. The rhythm of her life was no longer a steady beat. It was the frantic, terrifying crescendo of an orchestra hitting its climax. The next 24 hours were a sleepless, nerve-shredding ordeal. Chloe sat with Rosie in their tiny living room, the legal document spread on the coffee table like a sacred text. $100,000. "Just for a cheek swab," Rosie hissed, her eyes wide. "Chloe, that's insane. You could pay off my student loans, your debts. We could get a new apartment. You could quit that stupid job." "It's not about the money, Rosie," Chloe said, tracing the embossed letterhead of Worthington Industries. "No, it really is, and if they're right, what does that even mean? My whole life, everything I thought I knew about myself would be a lie. Or," Rosie countered gently, "it would be the truth, the real truth. You've always felt like a puzzle with a missing piece. Maybe this is it." The pull of that missing piece was undeniable. The next day, with a trembling hand, Chloe called Arthur Harrison and agreed. The process was swift and sterile. A doctor with kind eyes and a discreet manner met them at a private clinic. He took a swab from the inside of Chloe's cheek and another from a hopeful Eleanor. Max, still recovering in a private wing of Mass General Hospital, provided his sample via the hospital. The samples were sealed, labeled with anonymous codes, and sent to a top-tier genetics lab. The results would take a week. During that week, Chloe's life was suspended in a strange, surreal bubble. The Worthingtons, true to their word, deposited the money. Seeing the number in her bank account felt like a typo. It didn't feel real. At their insistence, relayed through Harrison, she took a leave of absence from the Sterling Grill. They didn't want her facing any more public scrutiny. Eleanor requested to see her again, not in a sterile hotel suite, but at the Worthington estate on the outskirts of Boston, a sprawling mansion that looked more like a museum than a home. Chloe, feeling like an imposter in her best dress, agreed. She found Eleanor in a sun-drenched conservatory, overflowing with orchids of every imaginable color. The old woman was weaker now, leaning on a silver-handled cane, but her eyes were bright with a nervous energy. "I wanted you to see this," Eleanor said, gesturing for Chloe to follow her into a grand wood-paneled library. The walls were lined with books, but one wall was dedicated to family portraits. In the center was a large oil painting of a young woman. Chloe gasped. It was like looking in a distorted mirror. The woman in the portrait had the same dark hair, the same jawline, the same mole beneath her left ear. But her expression was one of fiery defiance, a stark contrast to Chloe's quiet composure. And her eyes? They were the same hazel eyes, but they burned with a fierce, untamable spirit. "That is my Sophie," Eleanor said softly, her hand hovering near the canvas, as if she could feel the warmth of her daughter. It was painted the summer she turned 21. She hated sitting for it. Said it was a stuffy tradition for stuffy people. Over the next few hours, Eleanor painted her own portrait of Sophie with words. She wasn't just a ghost or a name. She became a person. Sophie was bright, passionate, and rebellious. She clashed terribly with her father, a stern patriarch who had since passed away, and with her older brother, Max. Max always followed the path, Eleanor explained, a sad smile on her face. University, then into the family business. He understood the rules, the structure, the legacy, Sophie. She wanted to break the structure. She volunteered at shelters, protested corporate greed, sometimes her own family's, and she fell in love with a man we deemed unsuitable. Who was he? Chloe asked, captivated. His name was Jaime. He was an artist, a musician. He had a brilliant mind and a beautiful soul, but not a dollar to his name. My husband forbade her from seeing him. Max told her she was throwing her life away. The arguments were terrible. The last time I saw her, she had a terrible fight with Max. He called Jaime a parasite. She said she would rather live in a gutter with him than in this palace with them. Eleanor's voice broke. She screamed that she was leaving and never coming back. We thought she was being dramatic. We thought she would cool off and call in a day or two. But she never did. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the story hanging between them. Chloe looked at the portrait again, at the defiant young woman who might be her mother. She felt a strange kinship, a flicker of that same rebellious spark deep inside her own chest. As Chloe was leaving, Eleanor pressed a small velvet box into her hand. This was hers. "I want you to have it." Back in her apartment, Chloe opened it. Inside lay a delicate silver locket, tarnished with age. She carefully worked open the clasp. On one side was a tiny, faded photograph of Eleanor, looking much younger. The other side was empty. It was meant for a second photo, a photo that was never placed. Chloe closed her hand around the cool metal, a tangible link to a past she was only just beginning to uncover. Meanwhile, in his private hospital room, Max Worthington was awake and lucid. The news of the DNA test had been brought to him by Arthur Harrison. Max's reaction was not one of hope, but of a deep, unsettling dread. "What have you done, Arthur?" he rasped, his voice weak. Eleanor insisted. "After seeing the girl, the resemblance is undeniable." "Resemblance is not proof," Max shot back, a flash of his old fire returning. "You have opened Pandora's box. Some things are better left buried." "Why?" Arthur asked, his curiosity piqued by his boss's strange reaction. "If she is Sophie's daughter, she is family. She is your niece." Max turned his head to stare out the window, his jaw tight. A shadow passed over his face, a flicker of an expression Arthur had never seen on him before. Pure, unadulterated fear. "You don't understand," Max said, his voice low and strained. "You have no idea what you've just unleashed." He wouldn't say more, retreating into a stony silence, leaving Arthur to wonder just what part of Sophie's story had been omitted from the official family narrative. What was Max so afraid of? The secret, it seemed, wasn't just that Sophie had a child. The secret was why she had run in the first place, and it was a secret Max Worthington had been guarding for 25 years. The week of waiting for the DNA results felt like an eternity. Chloe found herself living in a strange twilight world. No longer just a waitress, but not yet a Worthington. The $100,000 sat in her bank account, a number so surreal it felt like play money. She paid off her modest debts and sent a generous check to her last foster mother, a kind woman who had always encouraged her to dream big. For the first time in her adult life, the crushing weight of financial insecurity was gone, replaced by a new, more complicated anxiety, the weight of expectation. She spent most of her time at the library, poring over old newspapers on microfilm, searching for any mention of Sophie Worthington's disappearance. The stories were brief, sanitized. Prominent Boston socialite vanishes. Family asks for privacy. There was no mention of a fight, no mention of a lover named Jamie. The Worthington machine had scrubbed the narrative even then. But as the days passed, a new, unsettling feeling began to creep into Chloe's life. It started small, the sense of being watched as she walked to the corner store. A black sedan parked across from her apartment building for 2 days straight, disappearing the moment she pointed it out to Rosie. "You're just paranoid," Rosie said, though her eyes darted nervously to the window. "This whole thing is messing with your head." Maybe it was. But then, one evening as she was walking home from the library, her purse strap was yanked sharply from behind. She stumbled, crying out as the bag was ripped from her grasp. A figure in a dark hoodie sprinted down the street and vanished into an alley. It happened so fast, she barely got a look at him. Shaken and trembling, she filed a police report, but she knew it was useless. A simple mugging, it happened all the time in the city. Except when she described the incident to Arthur Harrison during a routine check-in call, his reaction was anything but casual. "What was in the bag, Miss Mendoza?" he asked, his voice sharp. "Nothing important. My wallet, my keys, a library book, and the locket. The locket Mrs. Worthington gave me." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "The locket." Arthur's voice tensed with a new urgency. "Chloe, I am sending a car for you. I want you to pack a bag. You will be staying at the hotel until the results come in. The Worthington suite. At the Lenox. It's secure." Isn't that an overreaction? It was just a mugging. A mugger who ignored the $100 bill sticking out of your wallet and made sure to take a worthless old locket. "I don't think so," Arthur replied grimly. "Someone knows who you are, and they're sending a message." The move to the lavish suite at the Lenox Hotel was disorienting. One minute she was in her cozy, cluttered apartment. The next, she was surrounded by marble, silk, and a level of security that was frankly terrifying. A plainclothes guard was stationed in the hallway. Arthur explained it was a precaution. The incident with the locket had spooked him. It was not a random act. It was targeted. Why the locket? It had no monetary value. Its only value was sentimental and symbolic. It was a link to Sophie. Someone didn't want that link explored. His investigation, which had been a quiet background check, now kicked into high gear. He pulled the original uncensored police file on Sophie's disappearance. Buried deep in the supplemental reports was a name that had been dismissed at the time: Patricio Sandoval. Sandoval was a charismatic and ambitious real estate developer back then, a rival in the early stages of Max's career. He was charming, handsome, and utterly ruthless. Sophie had met him at a charity gala and had been, for a brief period, infatuated with him. The family, particularly Max, had detested him. According to the file, she had told a friend that Sandoval scared her and that he was involved in shady business. The lead was never pursued with any vigor. The Worthingtons had directed the police focus onto her artist boyfriend, Jaime, and the theory that she had simply run away. On a hunch, Arthur looked up Patricio Sandoval's current activities. He was no longer just a developer. He was a magnate, a powerful and shadowy figure with a reputation for crushing his opposition. He was also known for employing a very discreet, very effective security team, one rumored to operate in the gray areas of the law. A chilling theory began to form in Arthur's mind. What if the family's narrative was wrong? What if Sophie hadn't been running from her family, but from Patricio Sandoval? The day the results were scheduled to arrive, the atmosphere in the hotel suite was electric with tension. Eleanor arrived, her face pale, her hands shaking. Arthur Harrison stood by the window, his phone in his hand, waiting for the call from the lab director. Chloe just sat, her hands clenched so tightly her knuckles were white. The phone buzzed. Arthur answered, his expression unchanging. He listened for a long moment, saying only, "Yes. I understand. Yes." He hung up and turned to face the two women. He took a deep breath. "The results are in," he said, his gaze fixing on Chloe. "The mitochondrial DNA is a perfect maternal line match to Eleanor Hayes Worthington." He paused, letting the words sink in. "It is a 99.99% probability," he stated, his voice leaving no room for doubt. "Chloe Mendoza, you are the daughter of Sophie Worthington." A choked sob escaped Eleanor's lips. She sagged in relief, tears of joy streaming down her face as she reached a trembling hand toward Chloe. "My granddaughter. My dear, dear child." But Chloe barely heard her. Her world had just tilted on its axis. It was true, all of it. The portrait, the eyes, the stories. She was a Worthington. Before we continue, please take a moment to leave a comment about this story and rate it from 1 to 10. How are you feeling? If there's anything you'd like to share, I'm always here to listen. I hope you find a moment of peace and reflection as you follow this healing story and its journey of courage and justice. The puzzle piece had been slammed into place, and the picture it created was overwhelming. She was no longer an orphan, a girl from nowhere. She had a history, a lineage, a family, and in that moment of stunning revelation, another piece clicked into place. The feeling of being watched, the black sedan, the mugger who stole not money, but a memory. This wasn't about the Worthingtons trying to find her. This was about someone who had known who she was all along, someone who was terrified of her being found. Her appearance hadn't just stirred up a family's grief. It had disturbed a much darker, more dangerous secret. She looked at Arthur, whose grim expression told her he'd reached the same conclusion. "Someone tried to keep this a secret, didn't they?" she asked, her voice steady despite the tumult inside her. "Who are they? And what are they so afraid of?" The joy of discovery was instantly tempered by the cold chill of fear. Finding her family, it seemed, was only the beginning of the story. The real danger lay in finding out why she had been lost in the first place. The confirmation of Chloe's identity sent ripples through the Worthington empire, but the most profound impact was felt in the sterile quiet of Max Worthington's private hospital room. Arthur Harrison delivered the news in person. He had expected a complex reaction, but not the one he received. Max showed not a shred of joy or surprise. Instead, A heavy sigh escaped his lips, a sound of deep, bone weariness, as if a sentence he had feared for years had finally been handed down. He closed his eyes, his face a mask of grim resignation. "So it's true," he whispered. "She's here." "Max, this is wonderful news," Arthur began, but Max cut him off with a sharp wave of his hand. "No, Arthur, it's not. It's a reckoning." He struggled to sit up, his movements stiff. "Get my mother on the phone. And the girl, Chloe. Bring her here, now. There is something they both need to know. Something I should have said 25 years ago." An hour later, Chloe and Eleanor were ushered into the hushed atmosphere of the hospital room. Seeing Max up close without his armor of corporate power was a shock. He looked older, smaller, haunted by something far deeper than his recent health scare. His gaze landed on Chloe, and for the first time she didn't see a cold billionaire, but a man drowning in regret. "Mother," he began, his voice rough. "Chloe, I have not been honest. About the day Sophie left," Eleanor tensed. "What are you talking about, Max? You had a terrible fight. She ran off." "That's what you always said." "We did fight," he confirmed, his eyes fixed on a spot on the far wall. "It was the worst one we ever had. I said horrible things. I called Jaime a gold digger. I told her she was a disgrace to the family name. And she threw something at me, a vase. She screamed that she hated us, hated all of us." He paused, swallowing hard. "But that was not the last time I saw her." The silence in the room was absolute. "She came back," Max confessed, his voice dropping. "That night, long after you and Father had gone to bed, she snuck into my study. She was crying. She looked terrified. It wasn't about Jaime. Not anymore. It was about someone else." He finally looked at them, his eyes filled with a quarter-century of guilt. It was Patricio Sandoval. She had been seeing him before Jaime and had broken it off. But he wouldn't let her go. He was obsessed. She told me she'd found something about him, that his real estate deals were a front, that he was laundering money for very dangerous people. She said she had proof, a ledger she'd copied from his office. Chloe's blood ran cold. The name, Patricio Sandoval, the man Arthur was investigating. She said Sandoval knew she had it. Max continued, his voice trembling. He had threatened her. Told her if she went to the police, she would disappear. She was petrified. She didn't know what to do. She was afraid to tell Father, afraid of what Sandoval might do to Jaime or to us. So she came to me. She came to you. Eleanor breathed, her hand flying to her mouth. Max nodded, a single tear tracing a path down his gaunt cheek. She came to me, her big brother. And what did I do? I didn't believe the scale of it. I thought she was being dramatic, exaggerating to get back at me for the things I'd said. I saw him as a business rival, a snake, but not a monster. I told her to give me the ledger and I would handle it, use it as leverage to make him back off. He squeezed his eyes shut, but she wouldn't. She said she didn't trust me. She said I only cared about business and power. She said she needed to disappear, get away before he could find her. She begged me for money, cash, enough to start a new life somewhere far away. This was the moment that had haunted him, the decision that had broken him. And I gave it to her, he choked out. I went to the safe. I gave her $50,000. I told her to go, to be safe, and to call me when she was settled. I thought I was helping her. I thought I was protecting her, and the family, from scandal. He looked directly at Chloe, his defenses completely gone. She walked out that door, and I never heard from her again. For 25 years, I let everyone believe she ran off because of a fight. But the truth is, I sent her away. I sent her out into the night, alone and terrified, running from a man I underestimated. I didn't protect her. I financed her disappearance. The reason for his collapse in the restaurant was suddenly, brutally clear. It wasn't just the shock of seeing a ghost. It was the instant, crushing weight of his failure. In Chloe's face, he hadn't just seen his lost sister. He had seen the living embodiment of his guilt. Eleanor let out a sob, a raw, heartbreaking sound of pure anguish. Not for a lost daughter, but for a terrified one she never knew she had. Chloe stood frozen, the pieces of her life clicking into a terrifying mosaic. Her mother wasn't a reckless runaway. She was a woman in fear for her life, trying to protect her unborn child. She hadn't been abandoned. She had been running to save her, and the man she was running from, Patricio Sandoval, was still out there. A powerful, ruthless man who had already threatened her mother. A man who now knew that Sophie Worthington's daughter, that one loose end he probably thought was long gone, had just been found. The theft of the locket wasn't a warning. It was a promise. He was coming to finish what he started. "Arthur," Chloe said, her voice cutting through the family's grief with a new clarity and strength. "The mugging. Sandoval knows. He knows I'm here." Max's head snapped up. A new kind of fear for Chloe, eclipsing his guilt. "My God," he whispered. "What have I done?" He hadn't just opened Pandora's box. He had put a target on his niece's back. Max's confession transformed the landscape of the mystery. This was no longer a family tragedy. It was a criminal investigation. The terrifying, comprehensive resources of the Worthington family, once used to suppress the story, were now unleashed to find the truth. Max, energized by a potent cocktail of guilt and a desperate need for redemption, directed the operation from his hospital bed. Arthur Harrison became the field marshal. He hired a team of the best private investigators money could buy. Ex-FBI agents and forensic accountants who operated with surgical precision. Their target, Patricio Sandoval. They worked from a secure suite in the Worthington Tower, the walls covered with timelines, photographs, and connection charts. Chloe was at the center of it. She was no longer a passive participant. The vague, hazy dreams she'd been having began to coalesce into something more tangible, as she was surrounded by the details of her mother's life. "The smell of pine," she told Arthur one afternoon, staring at a map of New England. "And rain. Lots of rain. I remember being cold, wrapped in a blanket that smelled like my mother's perfume, like lilacs." The investigators cross-referenced weather patterns and geography from 25 years ago. A prolonged storm system had battered northern New Hampshire and Vermont in the weeks following Sophie's disappearance. It was a thread. They dove into Sandoval's finances from that era. The forensic accountants peeled back the layers of shell corporations and offshore accounts. They found it, a series of structured, untraceable payments to a holding company linked to known fixers, people who made problems disappear. Permanently. The payments began 1 week after Sophie vanished. While the investigation raged, Chloe focused on the personal. With Eleanor, she sorted through boxes of Sophie's belongings that had been stored in the mansion's attic for decades. They found journals full of passionate, angry poetry, sketchbooks filled with drawings of Jaime the artist, and photo albums. As they leafed through one worn leather album, Chloe's breath hitched. She pointed to a snapshot taken at what looked like a lakeside cabin. Sophie was in the foreground, laughing with her back to the camera. But behind her, leaning against a tree, was a man in the shadows. He was handsome, slick, with a confident smile. On the pinky finger of his right hand, he wore a distinctive gold ring with a black onyx stone. "Who is that?" Chloe asked. Eleanor squinted. "Oh, that's Patricio Sandoval. Sophie brought him to the lake house once, long before Jaime. I never liked him. He had cold eyes." Chloe stared at the ring. A powerful, visceral jolt shot through her. A fragmented memory, sharper than any before. She was very small, sitting in a car seat. It was dark. A man's face was leaning in toward her. He wasn't smiling. He was wearing that ring. The onyx stone caught the green light from the dashboard. He was saying something to her mother, his voice a low, threatening hiss. Her mother was crying, telling him to get away from her baby. "The ring," Chloe whispered, her hand trembling as she pointed to the photo. "I remember the ring. The memory was the key. It placed Sandoval with Sophie after she had left Boston. He had found her." The investigators, armed with this new information, focused their search on properties owned by Sandoval or his associates in northern New Hampshire from that specific time frame. They found one, an isolated hunting cabin near the border of Vermont, bought through a shell company and sold a year later. As they were digging, a package arrived at the hotel for Chloe. It was a small, padded envelope with no return address. The security team scanned it and found nothing dangerous. Inside was a single old Polaroid photograph. It showed a young woman, Sophie, handing a baby bundled in blankets to another woman outside a small clapboard church. Sophie looked exhausted and frightened, but her expression as she looked at her child was one of fierce, heartbreaking love. On the back of the photo, written in shaky cursive, were 3 words: St. Jude's, Lincoln, NH. It was a message from the past, a final breadcrumb left by a mother who knew she might not survive. Lincoln, New Hampshire was a small town, deep in the White Mountains. Arthur and a stunned Chloe, flanked by security, drove there immediately. St. Jude's was a small, weathered church, exactly as it appeared in the photo. The priest was long dead, but the church's records were meticulous. They found what they were looking for in the baptismal registry from 25 years ago: Chloe Mendoza. Parents, deceased. Godmother, Caterina Alvarez. Caterina Alvarez. The name resonated with Arthur. It had been on the periphery of his investigation. A former housekeeper for the Worthingtons who had resigned suddenly around the time Sophie disappeared. They had her last known address, a small town in Massachusetts. The picture was now terribly complete. Sophie, knowing Sandoval was closing in, had made a desperate plan. She drove to Lincoln and handed her most precious possession, her daughter, to the one person she trusted implicitly, her former housekeeper, Caterina. She must have given Caterina the cash Max had provided, telling her to disappear and raise the child under a new name. The car crash story was a fiction created to protect Chloe from anyone who might come looking. The Polaroid was the receipt, proof of what she had done, a message she hoped would one day be found. After handing over her baby, Sophie Worthington, now alone, had turned back to confront her tormentor, armed with nothing but a ledger and a mother's courage, and she was never seen again. The investigators searching the property records for the hunting cabin found their final grim piece of evidence. The cabin had burned to the ground a few months after Sophie's disappearance. The official cause was listed as an electrical fault, but one of the ex-FBI agents on Arthur's team found an old, forgotten witness statement from a local hunter who reported seeing a dark sedan with Massachusetts plates leaving the property at high speed on the night of the fire. There was no longer any doubt. Patricio Sandoval hadn't just threatened Sophie. He had hunted her down and silenced her. Just as Arthur was relaying this information over the phone to a horrified Max, his lead investigator burst into the room. "We have a problem," he said, his face grim. "Sandoval just landed his private jet at a small airfield 30 miles from Boston. He's off-grid, and our surveillance on Chloe's old apartment? The unit across the hall was just rented 2 days ago under a false name. The tenant matches the description of one of Sandoval's top security men. He hadn't been hunting for Chloe. He had been waiting for her to go home." Chloe, who overheard this, felt a paralyzing fear. Rosie is still there. Sandoval, unable to get to Chloe in her fortress, was going to use her friend as bait. The drive back to Boston was a blur of dread. The investigator's discovery was terrifyingly clear. Patricio Sandoval knew who Chloe was, and he was using her friend Rosie as bait. He had a man in the apartment across the hall, waiting for Chloe to walk into his trap. Dismissing Arthur's vehement protests, Chloe insisted on being the one to go in. She would wear a wire. It was an incredible risk, but it was the only way to ensure Rosie's safety. This was her fight. It had been her fight since the day she was born. Taking a steadying breath, she walked into the apartment. The scene was chillingly quiet. Rosie was sitting on the sofa, her face pale with terror. Standing behind her was Patricio Sandoval, impeccably dressed, a predatory smile on his face. On his finger, the gold onyx ring gleamed. "Chloe," he purred, "I'm so glad you could join us. The resemblance to your mother, it truly is uncanny." "Let her go," Chloe demanded, her voice cold. Sandoval scoffed, his arrogance overriding his caution. "Your mother was a fool. She had something of mine, and she chose to protect a silly little ledger over her own life. And yours, a pointless gesture." He was trying to poison Sophie's memory, but Chloe only felt a surge of strength. She met his eyes, her voice clear and strong. "Her story is going to be told," she said, delivering the prearranged distress signal. "It's over." Sandoval laughed and revealed a handgun pressed discreetly into Rosie's side. "It's over when I say it's over." In that instant, the world exploded. The front door and the windows shattered as the tactical team crashed in from two directions. Rosie, seizing the moment, dove to the floor. Sandoval snarled, raising his weapon toward Chloe in a final, desperate act. Before he could fire, a single, deafening shot echoed from the doorway. Max Worthington stood there, flanked by Arthur, a handgun held steady. Sandoval crumpled, clutching a wound in his shoulder. "For Sophie," Max stated, his voice flat with finality. In the aftermath, Sandoval's empire unraveled. Faced with overwhelming evidence and Max's testimony, he confessed to everything. Investigators excavated the site of the burned cabin and finally found Sophie's remains. Sophie Worthington, no longer a missing socialite but a brave mother, was finally laid to rest with the honor she deserved. Life for Chloe changed irrevocably. She was an heiress, but the wealth was secondary to her purpose. She established the Sophie Worthington Foundation, a charity dedicated to helping women and children in crisis. The Worthington family wasn't magically healed, but it was whole. Max found redemption in his work for the foundation, and Eleanor found peace in the presence of her granddaughter. Chloe, finally understanding her past, was no longer her mother's ghost, but the living legacy of her courage. She was home. This incredible story shows us that the past is never truly gone. It lives on in the secrets we keep, in the faces of strangers, and in the undeniable pull of family. Chloe's journey, from a humble waitress to the heir of a powerful legacy, is a testament to the fact that our identity is so much more than our circumstances. It's a story of a mother's ultimate sacrifice, a family's painful reckoning with the truth, and the discovery that knowing where you come from can finally show you where you are meant to go. If this story of fate, secrets, and the unbreakable bond of family touched your heart, let us know in the comments below which part of the story impacted you the most. Your engagement helps our channel grow and bring more stories like this to light. Don't forget to like this video, share this story with someone who loves a deep mystery and emotional drama, and most importantly, subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you never miss our next incredible real-life drama. Thank you for listening.